Feel so very welcome. I mean, between the weather, which has been just a delight, and this wonderful welcome, I am delighted to be here. I'm going to talk to you about my work in the A+ project, Financial Capability. As you can guess from my very diverse background, I have a way of looking at things a little bit differently. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is the possibility that financial behaviors are a developmental process, and therefore is something that is worthy of study in the social sciences. So here in this room I have these family science, wonderful researchers, human development researchers. I need to hear from, and consumer researchers, to help me think through this idea to make sure it sounds feasible, plausible. Okay, it's kind of funny. I've got these wonderful colors, which are very Minnesota colors, yes? It's the first time that I'm showing A+ data not in the red and blue of U of A, so this is a transition. Let me start by thanking the National Endowment for Financial Education and City Foundation, as well as TCAI, because they helped us collect all of this data. And with that, I also want to let you know this is what I left behind to come here today. Okay. Also want to acknowledge some of my co-researchers, colleagues on this. As you can imagine, this project's been going on since, I guess, 2007, conceived probably a little bit before that. And it takes a lot of people to make this thing happen. So the current researchers, Dr. Shim, who many of you know, is in the University of Wisconsin. She's a dean there, but Soya never lets go. Okay, so she's at my side, letting me know how these pieces move on. And Dr. Staten here at TCAI. And a cast of characters, not least of which is sitting in this room. We have Melissa, we have Sabrina. I don't see Robert, but he's the one who set this whole thing up. So thank you all for the work that you do. Let's begin by talking about what I mean by this idea of financial capability. Okay. Back in the 30s and 40s, okay, there was this thing called consumer resources, family and consumer resources, looking at how family finances were passed on, how they made a difference in the health of families and households. And then somewhere around the 60s, it dropped off the map. Nobody was really interested anymore in family finances. And I was actually talking to my sister, who is not a researcher. She's a software developer. And I said, you know, isn't that kind of funny that that happened? She said, no. After World War II, everybody had money. Everybody had jobs. Who cared about money? The money was flowing, and there was credit. Okay? So here we are, fast forward 50, 60 years later, and what we have are situations that are much more similar to what life was like in the 30s and 40s. And so once again, I asked the question about financial capability among, particularly for my interest, young households, emerging households. Because, as all of you developmental people know, the earlier you learn something, the more likely it is to carry on. And with something like financial behaviors, well, why would I care about it now? Because frankly, it starts to become important at this stage of life. And let me begin by talking about what are some of the developmental goals of young adulthood. Interestingly, whether you call this emerging adulthood, transition to adulthood, late adolescence, what we're talking about is this idea that in the transition to adult, okay, it's a very complex process. Just like the transition to adolescence is difficult, it's made even bigger now because you're expected to, at this stage, take a lot of responsibility for your own life choices. So it's a time of increasing personal responsibility, not just for finances, but careers, okay, relationships. So this is a time big decisions are made, and they kind of carry through your whole life, unless you're like me, in which case you change it. It's no big deal. And the important thing about it, and why I think it's very developmental, is developmental theory talks about every stage of life being the precursor to the next stage of life. So the choices that you make, the decisions that you make, the behaviors and the patterns that you set up follow you into the next stage. Not only that, they sort of make the launching pad for you to move forward. So what differentiates people who thrive from people who don't thrive isn't just a decision they make at one point, it's the cumulative effect of all that. What is also happening or current part of this thing is this becoming an adult used to mean some very specific markers, very clear, definable role changes. So this idea of you go to school, okay, you graduate from school, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you buy a house, whatever. That doesn't happen anymore. What's happening now is the transition to adulthood isn't about achieving these markers in any specific order, or frankly, even achieving them at all. It's this idea of assuming this quiet quality inside of yourself where you take responsibility. Okay? What is in common, okay, in both stages, one used to be more implicit, one less implicit, is this idea of you're responsible for financing your own life. Okay? So whether it's you choose a career or you make a job change because it's a better salary and it helps you support your family better, whether you choose to buy a home or live in an apartment because of the life choices you make, it still comes down to a lot of the decisions that young adults make in this stage have financial implications. Okay. So for me, I like this idea of financial capability being an unspoken quality of what it means to be an adult, become an adult. And I look at it in two ways. The top is the definition that's used in a lot of, well, I should say there isn't a lot of research in what I do, okay? There are personal finance people and economics people who look at money one way, okay? There are developmental people who look at financial stress as a risk factor, perhaps, for ideal development. Okay? But there are very few people who look at financial capability as a developmental process. So that definition comes from people, not necessarily developmental people. This is the one that I find most interesting. It talks about financial capability as acquiring knowledge, skills, capabilities, essentially, these skills that you have that allow you to know what kind of decisions to make that are in your best interest. The interesting part about this last definition from Johnson and Sheridan, it's this idea of having opportunities to maximize your chances. Because one of the things that becomes really clear when I look at the personal finance literature is they think everybody comes from white middle class families. Okay? And what does financial capability look like in white middle class families isn't necessarily the same thing it's going to look like for Latino families or new immigrant families or very wealthy families. Though I don't think the very wealthy families have too much to worry about. Okay? So the topic is Arizona Pathways to Life Success, or the A+ project, which any of you who have been around here for a while know, because God knows I've been knocking on your doors for help along the way. But it's the idea of financial capability in a changing world, and why I think it's important. From the beginning, this A+ project was designed to look at a couple of questions a little bit differently from other research. How do young adults develop financial capability? And secondly, is there any relationship between financial capability and life success? The approach that we took is a longitudinal study, because if you want to see how things develop, you have to study them over time. And so we launched the first wave back in 2008, spring of 2008. Oh my God. With just over 2,000 first-year University of Arizona students. So this is a very Arizona-based study. We recruited them any number of ways. Those of you who were here at the time might remember seeing posters, flyers, conversations, public service announcements. I was on the local TV station just saying, come on kids, you gotta respond. And we had 2,000 respond. Then we had this amazing thing called the financial crisis happen. And so we went back and resurveyed very quickly 750 of those students. When they were in their fourth year of college, not necessarily senior year of college, because you all know how that works, we resurveyed them again to see how they were ready, how are they getting ready for their life after college. And our plan is to continue to study this group of young adults until midlife, so that we can really understand how these early financial behaviors relate to what's going on later on. from the research that we did in waves 1 and waves 1.5 and wave 2, we really were able to confirm some models that showed that financial capability is a changing process. It's dynamic. Over the course of the college period, behaviors change, and some of the things that drive those behaviors to change are knowledge, okay, an understanding of how personal finance works, and financial, what I call financial parenting, just like any other parenting. Okay? These are the things that parents do relative to financial behaviors, financial attitudes, financial values of their children. And this is the model that we sort of came up with and tested. So this idea that there's a cognitive process that happens. Do I have a thing? Yeah. So there's this cognition that happens, which is you first have to understand how the money system works. You have to understand what interest rates are. You have to understand what a FAFSA does for you in terms of repaying your college loan. But there's also this socialization part of it, which is essentially the things that parents do, the things that significant others do, the things that happen in the media, that happen at work, that help people understand how they interact with money. Our argument is that there's this process that happens, and we think it's a developmental one, that in this process of learning about money and having people tell you about money and observing what happens when you have it or don't have it, you gain this self-awareness of, why do I care? Why is it relevant to me? Okay, why do I need to know about this stuff? And unfortunately, there are a lot of young adults, and probably older adults too, who don't care about that. But the self-awareness part starts to say, I can see how this might make my life better, why it's important to me, or how it pushes me in certain directions. Once I'm aware of that, I can change my behaviors. Okay? I adapt my behaviors because I know how the system works, and I want to make the system work for me. And ultimately, it results in this thing that I'll call financial capability. So where are we now? Well, now that we've got 3 waves of data, okay, the 3rd wave was collected last spring, and the young adults are now out of college. They're actually in careers and starting jobs. What's interesting, perhaps, and this has come out in our research insights, is that of the original 2,000 students, we were able to talk with about 1,000 of them. And half of the 1,000 were still relying upon parents for some financial support to meet their monthly obligations. That's a big number. So that kind of talks to how important I think this topic is, and if you're a parent, why you might want to think it's important too. So, the present study, I propose that financial capability is a developmental process of young adulthood. Okay? That there is something called a developmental cascade that will explore in this idea of why early financial behaviors relate to later financial capability. And third, it's associated with young adult success. So if this is truly a developmental task, then successfully navigating that task should ensure better outcomes for young adults. We empirically tested the model with the panel study of these 968 young adults. And once we do that, we look to see, are there specific factors that differentiate the pathways in terms of the financial capability of this group of young adults? And you can stop me at any time, because if this is interactive, that'd be great. The underlying assumptions of the project are that self-sufficiency is a developmental goal, and that despite a common developmental goal, there will be many different pathways toward achieving financial capability, what that looks like, what it sounds like. The theoretical framework that I use for this particular study comes from the work of Mastin and Sacchetti, and they're both at the University of Minnesota, but that's not why I use the research. I do it because they come up with this idea. This is primarily used in the child and adolescent literature to look at primarily psychopathology, risk and resilience factors that contribute to well-being or lack of well-being among youth and young adults, well, youth and adolescents. But their premise is that this idea of if you're able to function well in one domain of life, okay, that spills over, okay, into subsequent developmental periods, and it also eventually spills over into other domains. If these behaviors continue over time, they can actually promote or inhibit one's personal development. And finally, failures to achieve key tasks within key domains, okay, would be associated with maladaptive outcomes. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this piece. Is anybody here familiar with the... Okay. So one of the things I'd really like to know is this has never been used, or at least I'm not aware that it's ever been used in a young adult paradigm. I know it's never been used looking at financial behaviors before. So I think it works, but I've thought a number of things have worked until the reviewers said this doesn't work. So, okay. So my main hypothesis is that financial behavior in the first year of college is going to form the basis for young adult financial capability. That's the beginning marker. That financial behavior over time will cluster into distinct patterns, so they won't be all the same pattern, and that these distinct patterns will actually form developmental cascades, meaning when they shift out there, people who have been responsible in their financial behaviors early on will be more responsible later on, and ultimately more successful in the transition to young adulthood. Why the first year of college? Okay. The obvious answer is it's a convenient sample. We're here at a college university, why wouldn't we test it? But it really goes deeper than that. We're looking at young adults, in particular college students, because it's an interesting bubble of time. When you have college students sitting here in these classrooms, they're independent from their parents in that they have to make decisions day to day on their own for the most part, but they're still very tied to their parents. Many parents are still paying for a lot of their financial obligations associated with college. And so it's an interesting group of people where we could focus on the development of these behaviors among somewhat of a homogeneous group. So if I were to look outside in a non-college sample, I don't know if it would look the same, okay? Because there are a number of other issues that young adults who choose not to go to college would bring to the table. So the first model that I'm showing you here is, this is what I think, this is how I envision this thing working. And that is financial behavior at wave 1 predicts financial behavior at wave 2, which predicts financial behavior at wave 3, and ultimately looks at young adult life success. And I look at 3 domains of young adult success. First is adult status, which is, do we feel like an adult? Because that's a big part of young adulthood today. The second is career status, which is where are you in the pathway of providing for yourself, for your job. And the third is this idea of financial self-sufficiency. Are you depending upon others to meet your financial obligations, or are you able to do it on your own? So and I have one research question, which is, okay, so if there are these developmental pathways, these cascades, what differentiates among the cascades? The way we recruited all these young people was we sent them emails. Now, the interesting thing that we found happen here is by the time they're out of University of Arizona, even though their emails are still valid, they don't necessarily see those emails. And I thought that was kind of funny until I went to Minnesota and got to keep my email. And then what I realized is it's really hard to look at both of them. Okay? And if you forwarded them to your real email, which was a good way to find out, they didn't get deleted from your email thing. And then you get these nasty messages like clean up your email. So I could see now why a lot of these messages went uncovered. So what does that mean for wave 4? That means we have to find another way to recruit them. We also sent several email reminders to the non-responders. We sent out postcards. We sent out letters. I was on Facebook. I was on LinkedIn. we were finding them any way we could. And we ended up getting just over 1,000, which is a return rate of 55% from the group that we could handle, and 968 usable surveys. And these are the young adults who completed all 3 samples. The breakdown is very similar to what we had here at the U of A. I mean, it's predominantly white, 67%. But we do have a large Latino population who participated all 3 waves, Asian, Black, and a small Native American, and then we had some that were other and missing. And if it doesn't add up, it's because I can do finance, I just can't do arithmetic. Okay. More females than males, which is not very different when you see most social science research. And what I thought was interesting is the breakdown of the Family SES. Okay, so we had a good distribution of young adults who are not from well-heeled families. And the way we determine Family SES is we look at parents' education level as well as parental income. So this is based on their family of origin basics. No questions on methods, okay? Just so you know. That's true. It was done with latent growth. It was latent growth modeling. I clearly did not do it. The multinomial, the logistic regression ANOVA, okay, I could get away with that. But the intent was to see if we have these pathways and, in fact, what differentiated them. The measures. These are my measures of the developmental cascade. So the financial behavior. These were 8 items that the young people answered. How often they engaged in 8 different financial behaviors. Things like, do you track your monthly expenses? Do you budget? That sort of thing. The adult status is the measure that was used by Arnett. So basically, do you feel, how adult do you feel? On a scale of 1 to 5. Career status, this is actually 3 separate indicators. I'm going to kind of mix it up. So we have an objective career status. And that was fun because that's when we found out 50% of these kids were relying upon their parents. So they were either unemployed, okay, and looking. They were employed part-time or employed self-employed or still in school. And then the third group were those who were employed full-time. Their subjective career status relates to how satisfied were they with what they were doing. And so we asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you that this is a career job for you? And then we also asked from a comparative perspective, because one of the things that's been in the news a lot is the fact that a lot of young adults are sucking wind. Okay? So we asked them, compared to your peers, how well off do you feel? And they were a lot worse off or not. And then self-sufficiency is that indicator of meeting their own financial obligations. So the scariest part were there was maybe 16 or 17% of these young adults who were relying upon their families and taking out loans too. Financial knowledge. Okay, remember I said cognitive stuff is important, and so we measured it subjectively, objectively, and whether or not they were taking financial education classes. I don't need to go over all that unless you have questions on it. I'll give you a minute to read through it while I drink water. I don't drink as much water in Minnesota. Oops, I blew it. That was the intermission. Okay.
Joyce, we have a question. For your objective question, if you expect to carry a balance, the APR is the most important.
Yep.
We say true. Is that true?
Yes, okay. If you expect to carry a balance. I know, that's the other thing that's always fun. I have these questions, these true-false questions. People say, oh, wow, these are really easy. Is that the right answer? Yeah. Good question, good answer. Okay. Okay. Did I not do something? Click what?
Somehow got out of the application. Now it should work.
Thank you. The second set of measures is financial agency. these turn out to be these are very interesting. It's this idea of self-efficacy, financial self-efficacy. How confident do you feel about your finances? Financial control. Do you control your money, or does your money control you? And then financial attitude. How do you feel about things like tracking your monthly expenses? Financial parenting. Like all parenting, there are a couple of ways you do it. First way, you model good behaviors. You balance your checkbook, your kid gets, that's a good thing. You do some smart shopping, your kid does some smart shopping. Communication, do you talk about financial matters? And this is really important in the young adult period, because we know that there's a shift in the relationship between parents and their kids at this stage to a more egalitarian, peer-like relationship. And the truth is, it's also at this time of life that a lot of these young kids are hitting some financial decisions that are new to them. There's scenarios they haven't held before. I mean, they're holding debt, and a lot of them, not so much here in Arizona, but student loan debt is really high. So that's a big responsibility. Okay? And we know that stress makes people a little punchy, so it's a good thing to talk about. And expectations. This is my favorite one. Okay? Because to this day, I still have that little voice of my mother in the head saying, you should do that, you should do that. I expect, you know how to behave. That's what financial expectations are all about. My parents think I should do these things. And so our results. We did find 3 distinct pathways through financial behaviors to this thing called financial capability. Okay, so, and at each stage, the pattern shows, or the 3 patterns show levels higher than the other. So there's no crossover that happened. Well, some might have been, but. And this top layer, okay, we call them the high functioning students, because they had really good financial behaviors. They're very responsible. They tracked what they were doing. They stayed within their budget. And all it did was get better. Not significantly. This is not a significant lift. When it comes to what we call the rebounders, we think this is the normative pathways. Okay? When they come in as first-year students, okay, they know everything, right? They're on their own. They go out with their friends. They take out that credit card. They do whatever it is. They have a good time. Then they get ready here to leave college, and the reality starts to hit in. It's like, oh my God, I've got to pay back those student loans that I was using to go out with my friends, and I have to get a job, and I have to find a place to live, and what am I going to do? So they pay a little, get a little depressed. But then, once they're out of college, okay, they start to get it back together again. If they have a job, they can pay their bills. This is the group that's of concern. Okay? They came in with very low financial behaviors in the beginning. They went even lower, and by wave 3, they still hadn't recouped where they were at wave 1. And that's 27%. I think it's actually 26%. If the numbers don't add up again, you got it, rounding numbers. Yeah, so those are the 3. So I think that there's this clear link between financial behaviors in late adolescence, okay, and the practice of those behaviors through college that help us understand young adult markers of success. And I say that because if you look at the outcomes, those 3 outcomes that we talked about, the high-functioning young people, which is only 12%, okay, had more likely to be employed, more likely to feel adult, less likely to rely on their parents for financial support. The rebounding group was comparable, which means if you don't get it right away, don't worry, you'll learn. We all learn through our mistakes. Well, most of us learn through our mistakes. And most of these young people did. So there is this rebounding effect. But the interesting part about it is they're not as high as the high functioning. But I attribute that to, like, these are probably the engineers, the high functioning ones, the MIS people who not only had all that math stuff going, okay, they also probably got really good jobs. But again, this is a group that's struggling. Okay, they're lagging behind the other 2 on all outcomes. Okay, but I will, yeah. So that's enough said on that. That was. So the early differentiators. I apologize if this is. I tried to color code it to kind of make things stand out. So the blue things are the cognitive pieces, knowledge. Okay, the green things are the self-agency pieces, and the things in black are financial parenting. And there's no clear rhyme or reason to these things. But if we look at the knowledge pieces, objective knowledge doesn't matter. So even if you couldn't answer that question about APR, that's not the issue. And I think the reason that is happening is because when you know something, just a fact, that doesn't necessarily translate to relevance. Okay, so it'd be better if a young person in college knew, if I'm looking at credit card offers and one is 26% for unpaid balances and one is 22% for unpaid balances, I can figure out that 22% is better for me than a 26% thing. I don't have to necessarily know how to compute it. When it comes to the other two pieces, financial education, and those of you, and probably none of you are in this, but I study what this financial education does. Because 15 years ago, when they started saying, boy, college kids and credit card behaviors, bad, 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 we got to teach these kids. So we started doing these financial education classes. They've been doing it for 15 years, and kids are still bad, 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 bad. So maybe financial education doesn't work. That's where they're at now. Okay, so there's a whole group of people who for 15 years study it said, we should abandon that effort because it doesn't matter at all. And I say from this that I think they're looking at it the wrong way. Instead of financial education making you better at doing your finances, this is the piece. It's this lack of education, okay, that says if you don't have it, you could be in deep sneakers. If you have it, you may still have problems. But if you don't have it, you're really kind of at a disadvantage. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so when it comes to the green pieces, the self-agency, I think it's fun here because you can say, if you want young people, young adults, to really have good financial capability, awareness by the time they leave college and therefore don't sleep on your couch, here's where you'd start to look. They have to feel in control, but they have to have a positive attitude. And I can relate to that positive attitude because one of the things that I have to do in Minnesota, I can't walk around a lot because it's cold. It's really cold there. So my husband and I joined a gym. Okay. Thank God he joined the gym with me because I hate it. I really hate it. Okay. But I go because I don't have a good attitude about it. I hate it. Okay. But he has a good attitude about it. And I can see what a difference it makes because when he goes out of town, I don't go to the gym. I go to the gym. Yeah, so that's that. But if you want to worry about what's happening with the struggling kids, their money controls them. They don't control their money. Okay. And what you'll hear oftentimes with this group, we actually interviewed some of these kids, and it's this idea of some kids get all the break, or I had to do things on my own, or things never go my way. Money is just, something I'll never have. And so it's this defeatist attitude that makes them feel like it's not about skills, it's about opportunity, and they don't have it, which also may be true. But I should say this. I don't have listed here the control variables, SES, sex, ethnicity. And I don't because they didn't make a difference. And I like that. I like that finding because what it says is this model holds across those things. So this isn't, and again, let me preface this by saying these are still all kids who went to college. So they're different than kids who didn't go to college. But among those who choose to go to college, it's not about race and sex yeah, that one too. It's not about those. It's about managing your stuff.
But Joyce, what's interesting about your table is that when you look at your predictors, right, on the left, and I love your color coding, it helped me a lot, thank you. So, but what was interesting is that there's not actually that many out of your 1, 2, 3, out of your 9, there's only 2 that predict for both groups, right? The
yes.
financial education and then the financial control. There's some other ones that are, for high functioning or struggling, but the only 2 predictors that predicted for both of these groups, I don't think I would have guessed that, the financial education and financial control. That's kind of interesting.
I thought it was interesting too, because what it says is we have to look at promoting versus preventing. And that's how I would interpret it. If you really want to promote the behaviors, look at these. If you want to prevent things, look at these. And so, yeah. I'd be interested in anybody else's comments on that too, because that was kind of cool. But it is. Okay, on the parenting, See, the voice in your head. Mom says, stays there. That's really big. And then,
For high functioning.
but only for high functioning. Now you know what makes high functioning high functioning. My mother will kill me. She does. Okay. Interestingly, on the struggling kids, and I think this is very telling, it's from a role modeling perspective. And I can say that back in the first wave of data, what was fascinating to us is the good doobies, is what I'll call them. Okay, they're doing the right things with their behaviors. Were not necessarily, actually they were more likely to be low-income students, the lower SES kids, and the middle SES kids, not the higher SES kids. By the end, there was no difference. By the end, where we are so far. Yes?
I have a question. You were mentioning how that the population, it's all college kids, but did you look at or see any differentiation between if it's intact families, if there are students who didn't have family or parents, how that might factor into this?
We did not.
Okay.
That's a really good question. In wave one, we looked at that, and it didn't make a difference. But we didn't look at it. But I mean, there was some things that made a difference at wave one that didn't by wave three, and it could have been vice versa. So.
Because I'm just thinking about, because I do so much around foster youth, and so this is such a huge issue about kind of the promotion of and having self-sufficiency and wanting, like, if they're in the system to aging out, what that's going to look like. I mean, there's so many terrible outcomes, adult outcomes with that population. So it's making me really think a lot about kind of the measures that you have here and some of the work that I do.
And keep it in mind, because these are this is a college group of kids. Now, I will say that about 2%, maybe 3% of the young adults had dropped out. So we're including all of them in here. And it's a small number. 3% is not that many.
On I'm thinking about your making the parenthetical comment like it is a college sample. And I guess the other thing I would say to that is if you were going to design this study and pick a college, a major university in the United States of America to do it at, this would be one of the ones you would want to pick. Because this is one of the most diverse undergraduate student bodies at a major university in the world. I mean, in terms of socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, it just really is. I mean, there are places that are more ethnically, culturally diverse than the University of Arizona, but there aren't. Most other major universities are elite universities within larger state systems that, have a different kind of student pool than we have at this university. So in some ways, I mean, anyway, I don't know.
No, that's
you've
good.
Written about this a lot more. So but in some ways, I think there's a strategic argument that, like, yes, among college samples, you would want to seek an extraordinarily diverse group. Like,
Well, that's really helpful, because one of the criticisms we got on a review was that this is just one university. And that's true, it is one university, but it's a pretty diverse sample. And it's not like everybody came from from Arizona. We had a lot of people from California, a lot of people from Texas, Colorado. I mean, they're all over. So that's one piece of it. The other thing that I think is interesting, well, this is for going forward in wave 4, a lot of them don't live here anymore. A lot of them moved out. So that's the other reason why I think this will be an interesting sample going forward, because just because you were educated here and grew up here doesn't mean you live here. That's good. Yes?
I was curious to know if you measured identity development.
Funny you asked that question.
Because I think that they're possibly thinking that, they're reporting that they're adults, but they're not initially identifying themselves as that. That's why they're relying more on their parents. So they don't have this view of themselves as adults.
I will tell you that it ranged. Okay, I didn't look. We have included in this data financial identity, okay, which was mirrored off of personal identity, but we don't have individual identity yet. That one question is their self-report question. I don't think we looked to see what the relationship was between that and the self-sufficiency. But I can say that there were very few that were thinking either extreme. Most of them were that middle 3 blocks. So we don't have quite the variability that we think we would. I mean, it's a very small number who said, no, I'm not at all, and very few who said, yeah, I'm there.
So I know there's this new identity development measure by Fallon Roberts that measures identity development within emerging adults. And it has like different subcomponents of what an adult would look like future outlook, workforce, views. So I would think that maybe those individuals who report higher levels of identity development within that measure would also report high functioning versus low struggling.
It'd be interesting. I mean, I wish we had it, because when most of our questions have a financial aspect to them. And so what I find to be true among young adults and older adults is as soon as you throw in the word money or financial, it's like math. You know, you say, this is, oh, I can't do math, oh, I can't do finance. And so it's an interest, I can feel very adult, but I can't do finances. So I don't know, it would be really interesting. I don't have the data, but that would be kind of interesting. Yeah. So this is just a picture of what it looks like. I mean, if we assume that the rebounding group is the norm, because there's 60% of them in that group, the differentiators for the high functioning, and you're right, Melissa, those are different from the struggling students. But that's just a graphic of what we're seeing there. So what did we find? Early financial behaviors do pave the way, or seem to pave the way, for subsequent financial behaviors, that our college financial practices may actually mediate this relationship to college functioning. And I think that's kind of a unique perspective, which is sometimes particularly in the college years, you're not thinking about the implications, the financial implications of some of the decisions you're making. And for me, this is not just about money, it's about decision making. And how do you promote decision making among young adults in a way to help them understand that the consequences of some of the decisions you're making here are not going to be felt until you're 26 or 30 years old. Okay? But if you don't think about them now, there's greater likelihood that you're not going to like where you're at that point. And ultimately, it's this idea of financial parenting. Okay? If you look at financial parenting and financial self-agency, those are the factors that seem to be really pushing this capability method, which makes sense. Okay? So knowledge is the beginning. If you don't know it, you know, you can't make anything happen. But knowledge alone isn't going to make things happen. It's how it relates to you and what you do with it. And so in conclusion, I think we have this great conceptual model that talks about financial behavior as a developmental cascade, that there are several factors that distinguish higher levels of capability from lower level capabilities, and they're present in that transition to college, okay? Which I think is important for if we want to do something to promote the well-being of our young adults. And so my argument is that I think we need to add the financial domain into this idea of young adult development. So limitations, yes, this is a college-only sample, and a particular college sample, that we rely on these self-report measures, and it's only self-report, so it'd be nice to have some more objective data. Though there is a study that came out by FINRA Foundation, which is a national survey of adults 18 to 64. And interestingly, their results about this reliance upon parents for financial support, they find numbers very similar to ours. 34%, I think, where ours was 49%, but theirs went from the ages of 18 to 34. So, yeah, that's so. It's like this is really serious. This is a big thing. This is, but we still have this sample in an early adult life cycle. So when you first get out of college, I mean, it's like when I first moved to Minnesota, I had not a clue about where am I going to shop, where am I going to live, what am I going to do about this, and so a lot of that could be happening at this early stage. And so it's very possible that 4 or 5 years out, okay, they've sort of stabilized, and at that point maybe the model doesn't hold so much. Okay. So what's next for us is we're talking about a wave 4 data collection, and we're excited because if we get to pull this one off, they'll be approaching 30. Okay, and in the emerging adulthood literature, it's around 30 when a lot of them get it together. So a lot of those milestones about getting married or having, well, that's true, right? happen in that late 20, early 30 range. So we should see a lot of shifting happen then. And the thing that we want to add to it is, I talked about this idea of different pathways to markers of what I felt were normative life goals for young adults. But it's really possible and likely that personal goals and values could shift what you think is important. So financial self-sufficiency may not be so important among some groups than others. So I think we have to add in the personal values component to see how that shapes and bends the trajectories on the financial capability. I want to thank you for bringing me home so I could visit and warm up and thaw out. And if you have any questions, I would love to take them. Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
I am really intrigued with